You're going to have to excuse the croakiness. I'm just getting over my illness. And I'm just dropping in to kind of give a little bit of a backstory to my wealth story. That's my son in the background. As well as kind of the reason why I came into Ouroboros initium, but also Ouroboros from last year. And some other really interesting things that I've noticed over this time frame. So, how I came to be in Leah's world is actually quite fascinating. So last year, when I decided to jump in on the 2-week experience that they had, which is very similar to the Ouroboros initium that we're in at the moment, it was a month-long program at that point in time though, and I kind of came in towards it at the 10-day, 14-day mark, and there was actually an accountability kind of concept to it, that if I completed all of the work and then I submitted my journal entries and stuff like that, I would go into potentially win a position in Ouroboros 5. And so because I knew that it was something that I really, really needed to do, and there was probably no other way that I would do it, I actually condensed the 30-day program into 10 days and was doing probably a ruthless and inordinate amount of clearing on the holistic vessel, and in order to finish it so I could submit my questions. But what I'm going to do is I'm kind of going to go back up a little bit into the reason why that actually really appealed to me and the reason why I could do it. So I have a background, I'm from New Zealand, and so I'm part Indigenous and part English, Irish and Scottish, and last year I did an intuitive intelligence program, which was a 12-month program, and in that program there was a particular component of it that was about a decolonisation process, and from that decolonisation process I actually took that and extrapolated it out and put myself through quite an intense deconstructive process around decolonising the mind and decolonising my stories, looking at all of these, I guess, stories and perceptions and behaviours and things that I was doing in my life and pulling them back to the story of decolonisation, which is basically a story of disempowerment, or a story of power over instead of power with, in this kind of dichotomy that we find ourselves in. And the more that I dug into the story of decolonisation, essentially what I came to and what I was able to come to was the sense of harmonisation between these two appearingly warring factions within my own kind of genealogy, because I'm part Indigenous and I'm part English, right, basically. And so what I needed to do for myself was I needed to reconcile these apparent disparate places within me and reconcile my genealogy back into this kind of harmonious picture. And the way that I was able to do that was actually to recognise that colonisation as a construct, and as a machine, and a machine to disempower, and a machine to create separation, to create the illusion of separation, and to create this animosity between these kind of two genealogical parts of my DNA. And so when I was able to reconcile those differences, and essentially what it was is, so my background, my training as well, is that I'm a shamanic practitioner and I work with New Zealand First Light flower essences. And so I have come off the back of probably about 6 or 7 years worth of apprenticeship within that realm, with working with plant medicine and so forth like that. And so I went into essentially a shamanic journey with my grandparents, so both my grandmothers, and we sat and we spoke and we talked and we figured out between ourselves that this overarching thing called colonisation essentially was a construct, was a machine that tore our family apart, and I'm talking about my own kind of internal psyche, and created friction where there was none to begin with. And so it was more about me knitting them all back together, and creating this harmonious kind of family structure again, and being able to look at my grandmothers on both sides of the kind of DNA stride, so to speak, and look at them as human beings caught up within this really shitty construct. And because of the work that I was able to do, it was very much like a matrix moment for me after it had happened, where I could see all of these stories and programming and conditioning around me in regards to colonization. And I could see it everywhere, and it's definitely one of those moments where once you see, you can't unsee. And like Leah was talking about on the content that she was talking about in regards to the soul star and the crown chakra, is part of the work that I did in this reconciliation process that happened within me and within my own psyche, was this being able to see the illusion for really what it was. And when I started to see the illusion of colonization everywhere and how it creates a separation where there is none, that's when I started to look a little bit deeper. And when I started to look a little bit deeper, I started to notice that there were also woven within this colonization construct the stories of wealth, or stories of abundance, or stories of prosperity. For me, however, though, it didn't necessarily equate around with fiat currency or money. It's actually more to do with resources, because where I come from in New Zealand, the biggest, I guess, hurt that a nation suffers is there's this taking away of things that happened, and it was land and resources. And so when I come to wealth, it's from a resource perspective, because that's really what was taken away from us. And so I can see how insidious the government was in stealing and taking away resources and taking away land, and making people suffer in order to get it, and doing anything in its means necessary in order to do it. I mean, my family, my genealogy, part of our hapu, which is our family unit, they were actually poisoned with strychnine in the flower that was given to them as a gift. And so many of the men and women of a certain kind of childbearing age were basically wiped out. And so what happened was, it was my great-great-grandfather and my great-great-grandmother were left with all of these children, and they had to kind of look after them. And obviously my great-great-grandfather was completely pissed about the whole situation. And when they came back again, they were like, oh, you know, we're going to, can we please have your land now? And he was just like, if you set foot on my land, I'm going to kill you all. Quite mercilessly, but you know, that's what happens when you kill half your family. And this story and this genealogical kind of thread was woven through into my DNA. And so this is where these stories of kind of wealth, of resource extraction, of theft of resources, and taking things that aren't necessarily belong to anyone, because I come out from an understanding that ownership, we don't have a word for it. There's no such thing. And so it's resources for me when I talk about wealth, and being wealthy in all areas for me is when I talk about resources and having access to resources, and kind of things like love and compassion and all of that kind of stuff. So it was a really interesting way that I was coming off the back of this hugely deconstructive process within my own decolonization process. And then I moved into Ouroboros 5, which was like deconstruction on fucking steroids. And I must admit that I went in knowing that it would be challenging, and I went in knowing that there would be this deconstructive aspect to it, and I didn't quite, I guess, understand the capacity of myself to deconstruct myself, because I went in with eyes wide shut, so to speak. But it definitely showed me where there was so many stories and so many lies and so many kind of misconceptions about and illusions around wealth and around abundance and around money and around fiat currency, around resources, around ownership, around land, that it is something that is intrinsically woven within the kind of very fabric of my being, especially when I track it ancestrally. And so part of the wealth work that I did, I knew that it had to be deconstructive. I totally knew that it had to be something that would, in essence, break apart my own false reality of myself and my own false reality of what it means to have money, hold money, have resources, hold resources, allocate resources, and give and receive. So it was a really humbling period, and so this was September, October last year. And throughout that time, there was a lot of looking at my own story, so my own kind of personal story with wealth and with money. So we weren't amazingly well off. We were kind of considered middle class. We moved around a lot because my dad used to work on a farm, and so he used to just get work as a farm manager wherever we kind of could get work. So we moved a hell of a lot when we were younger, and part of that, there was always this kind of concept of having enough but not quite enough, that everyone could get everything that they needed from it. And so there was in some ways a going without, but also because of the our background, there was, you know, this added element of kind of shame, I guess, and blame. Was that the reason we went without was because we were Indigenous. And so it was a really weird space to be in as a child, hearing my mum's stories about, oh, I can't afford that, I don't want to get that, or not getting something because she really, really wanted to, but like saving it for us kind of thing. And so when Christmas used to come around, I remember that I used to save quite a lot of money, and so I used to basically just buy presents for everyone. That was like how I used to, you know, show people that I care, was buying them gifts, and really well thought out gifts, and kind of, you know, constructing them and stuff like that as well. And then there was this element of childhood where my mum came into quite a decent amount of money, and she purchased a property, and then over X amount of time, which was, I think it was about 5 years, the property went into mortgagee sale because my mum had kept up with her component of the payments but my dad hadn't, and so they basically had to sell the property. And so that's something that really sticks with me, because I'm just like, oh my god, you had all of that money and then now look what happened. And then this kind of leads into my own story, which was essentially the story of a lot of people in the financial system, where they're essentially trying to enslave you in debt. And so I went to university, I got a student loan, I got stacks of money out of my student loan to pay for my books, to also pay for really rad holidays and going places and doing things and buying really fucking expensive books. Because I was a massive bibliophile and I just loved being around books. And then it just accumulated because I didn't really know if I wanted to go to university, so I changed my degree, and then I did something else, and then I changed my degree back again. So there was all this backwards and forwards and stuff. And then credit cards came along, and I think at one stage I had about 4 credit cards. I don't even know how the hell I got them. And was basically just racking up stuff on my credit card and going places and, you know, doing cool things. And then all of a sudden I put a car on HP and kind of did that and stuff as well. And then slowly the kind of repayments and the crush kind of came in, and I just couldn't deal with it anymore. So basically I buried my head in the sand, and I went and worked on a cruise ship for 6 months and avoided it all, and then came back and I was just like, holy shit. So I ended up going into what's considered here in Australia a Part 9 debt agreement, which is one step away from bankruptcy, to kind of consolidate all my debts and then start paying them off, which I did for 5 years. And what was happening though is, because I was living in Australia, my debt in New Zealand was ticking over as a normal kind of I think it was 7.5% per annum debt clicking over, and there was no way that I could get on top of the interest, let alone the principal amount. And so I tried to negotiate with the government, but they wouldn't negotiate with me, so I had to enter into a bankruptcy agreement in New Zealand. And so there's been a lot of, I guess, stigma and shame and kind of guilt around my money story, because it's like, oh, there was this money and then I had to go into bankruptcy and I avoided it, and then I had to do this, and then so there's definitely been points in my life where I've made quite a lot of money because I've got a really good work ethic, so I work. So at one stage I think I was studying full-time, I was studying part-time, and I had a full-time job and a part-time job. And that's just kind of what I did for years, but it completely fried my system. And the way that I've come into this wealth work is that I knew that I really, really, really needed to do something about this real shitty story that I had kind of concocted on my own free will, and decided was my reality. I didn't want it to be my reality anymore, because I had seen part of my vision from my higher self, and in order to achieve that vision I needed to be extremely well resourced in order to get there. And so that's when I started to pick apart and figure out where I could find someone that could help me within this deconstructive process. And there's stacks of money mentors, there's stacks of kind of wealth programs and stuff out there, but nothing that really spoke to me like Ouroboros, because the reality is that it had the component of emotional resonance clearing to it, and I knew that that was the key for me, because that was the way to actually root out all of this kind of bullshit that was existing there that needed to get out of my system. And I'm amazingly grateful for the really challenging time. It was fucking heartbreaking, and there were elements of it that I knew I had compartmentalized and put to the side because I couldn't deal with them right then and that point in time, but I'm able to do that now. And so that's what round 6 of Ouroboros is going to be like for me, and it's this expansion phase as well too, which is really, really amazing. I equate it to, I guess, the shamanic work that I've done, and that I'm very deft at going into the psyche of my own choosing and going down and rooting down into the kind of muck to see what exists there and what actually is real. What's a directive from my higher self, and what is just bullshit that's been remnants that have been left over from kind of time frame after time frame and generational legacy that has been left for me in order to clean up. Because that's also another thing that I know as being a shamanic practitioner, is that this work that I do on myself, that I do for my ancestors, that I do for my lineage, is something that I am actually have to do, because I refuse to let this bullshit remain for my son. This is not his work, this is my work. And because of such, that is why I need to dive into it as deeply as I could potentially go, because these legacies of this kind of story and this patterning and these genetic traits when it comes to money, wealth, abundance and kind of currency, this is not what I'm leaving for my son. And so that's why I do the thing that I do. And my experience of the program so it's almost been a year now. And I must say that it took about that time in order for me to get perspective, to see how it's affected my life. And I think it's because I was so in it, I didn't understand, or was looking up to see. But the reality is that my whole world changed when I did Ouroboros 5. And I knew that it would, but I just didn't quite understand in what ways, shapes and forms it would. And it's only until now I have hindsight looking back that I can actually see that my complete reality around what fiat currency is, what money is, what abundance is, what prosperity is, what resources are, has been completely changed. And it is now sitting on what I would consider bedrock. And it's a bedrock of a knowing. There's a gnosis there that underneath it all, I am worthy of deserving of my wealth reality just by existing. And that is something that I would never have been able to say a year ago. But I can now, and I can say it with love and compassion for myself, because I know that I've been through the heartache, and been able to come out the other side and see how amazing it is to feel that kind of sense of worthiness and deserving on such an intrinsic and deep level. Nothing can shake that. And that is definitely something that I was looking for in a program, something to completely rearrange the molecules within my kind of reality, so that I could create this bedrock foundation so that I can build on top of it, because I've seen the vision that I've been allowed to see. And I know that part of that vision requires me to be extremely well resourced in order to get where I need to go. And what I've noticed over this time, I think it's been very subtle, because I've been doing all the things: journaling, listening to the soft regio frequencies, money tracking, checking my bank account, gratitude, proclamations, and journaling and mantras and yantras and stuff like that. Like, throughout all of it, it's this compounding effect that happens. And so I've only just noticed recently, when I was quite unwell, that looking back, that whole stage that I was unwell, which was for about a week, there was no critic talk in my head about, this is your fault, you kind of did this, you blah, 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 blah. It was all just a communion kind of with my higher self, going, okay, well, we need to do this, and so can you do this now, and we'll need to do that, and so we'll do that later. There wasn't a sense of kind of shame, there wasn't a sense of guilt, there wasn't a sense of blame. There was just this really amazing sense of peace, and I don't think that would have come at all unless I had done the work from Ouroboros, but also from my decolonisation process, and also just being willing to, in some ways, be really brutally honest and ruthless in my assessment of my reality. Because I'm very good at willing things, but sometimes the power of will allows a blind spot to enter into the world. And so being curious, but also ruthlessly curious, for me definitely helps. And that's something that's come from Ouroboros, from incrementally doing the work over time and seeing the compounding effect, and also being able to have this gnosis. Like, there's no way, shape, force, anyone externally could ever tell me anything that I'm never, ever worthy of deserving. I just know that they're full of shit if they even try to tell me that, because it's who everyone is. We are all inherently worthy and deserving, and that is part of this amazing work of Ouroboros. And I'm really, really looking forward to Ouroboros 6, and obviously the finishing up of this container as well, because it's been really amazing being able to dive back into clearing and stuff again now that I'm feeling better. I think overall my whole wealth reality has changed. I no longer have this kind of fast or famine way that I look at money. And that there's this kind of desperation, I guess, around money. I mean, yes, we all need money, and we need to do certain things with it at particular points in our time, but there's not this kind of chokehold that I have on money anymore. There's more of an acceptance, more of a kind of trusting that has come. There's more faith definitely involved, and surrender and sacrifice, and it's something that I'd be internally grateful for, coming across Leah and her amazing community, and obviously Laura, as well as Claire and Nicole as well, some of the ERC practitioners that I've been blessed to kind of work with within these particular containers. So it's been a wild ride, and I absolutely loved it, because it completely broke apart every preconceived notion that I ever thought about wealth. And could even conceive of, where is my wealth story going. And I'm just very, very grateful, not only for myself for being able to turn up and do the work and just keep showing up, but also for Leah and the team, the amazing team, for the work that they do and the work that they continue to do within this particular space, because it is very much needed in the world, and it's something that I would love everyone to do, but I also know that this work isn't for everybody, because it does take a certain amount of grit to get to it and to get through it. But through it, you definitely will get. I know this for sure. So yeah, I think I'll sign off now. But thank you very much for your time and for your energy, and I hope to see you potentially in Ouroboros 6, but we will see. So much aloha, my darlings. Ciao.